Awesome. Cool. Well, let's get started here. Thank you all for joining us for this hour of code. I love seeing that a lot of you don't have any experience with virtual reality, which this is the perfect place to start. There's so much happening in this field, and so we'll spend some time today getting into it. So my name is Ryan. I am a curriculum developer here at CodeHS. I actually taught high school physics for 7 years before switching over into the computer science world. So I really enjoy developing the computer science courses for CodeHS, and yeah, happy to be here.
And I'm David Burnham. I'm also a curriculum developer here with the team. Had previously taught computer science in high school, and I've also kind of helped develop some of the A-frame content that we see here today. So really looking forward to sharing it with you guys.
Hi, my name's Ebony. I'm on the customer experience team. I was a teacher in Chicago before coming here to CodeHS, and CodeHS has been my kind of introduction to computer science. Happy to be here.
Great, and as we go, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A section. We will answer them from there.
Awesome. So what is virtual reality? Virtual reality is an immersive 3D computer-generated environment which a user can interact with as if it were their own real physical environment. So different than some of the other computer-generated environments, virtual reality is really that full immersive experience. So the user is inside and just feels like that is their reality. And it's actually been around for a while, but it really hasn't become available until recently with some of the more advancements in the technology, which just makes it more affordable and accessible. So for example, if you have an iPhone or an Android, you can now experience virtual reality without having to buy another expensive device, just by using those with an adapter. So that's been a big part of the development. And I think the excitement about virtual reality is that it's just becoming a lot more accessible. So where is virtual reality used? The answer is really everywhere. And you can't, I imagine most industries could have some sort of outlet. And as the technology and the software catches up, there's really so much that you can explore in these virtual settings. So we're just going to highlight a few that I think are fun and interesting. So I'm sure you've at least seen it, if not played it before, but there are a lot of games now taking advantage of the virtual setting. So it's a totally new way to interact with the gaming world. And for a while now, professionals have been using virtual reality to actually train themselves. So this is a virtual recording of a pilot going through a pilot simulator or a flight simulator so that they can learn to fly a plane without actually having to be in the plane, which can be a little riskier or stressful. So they can actually, do their training before they actually get into maybe a little more risky environment. There are many ways in the medical field that virtual reality is being used. So this example is being able to look at the ins and outs of human anatomy without actually, being able to have a body in front of you. Surgeons can also perform a virtual surgery to be able to practice a technique or try different techniques out without needing to perform on an actual body. In psychology, this is really interesting. Under the guidance of a therapist, patients can now experience traumatic events as if they were real in this safe environment where they can now work through it together to start to work through whatever is triggering that person. And I think important for this year, I've really enjoyed this. You can travel around the world in a virtual environment and see these beautiful places without actually having to leave your home, which we can't really in 2020. So just such another cool way to use this to just expose yourself to new ideas and new places. And finally, I think this is such a huge tool for the art and design world, whether it's creating 2D or 3D art or being able to actually like model a 3D object and be able to spin it, in your virtual hands to see it, to designing a house in 3D and being able to actually walk through it and change things as you're in that environment. So really what it enables these creators to do is absolutely amazing. And I think it has such big implications in that design process. So yeah, there's a lot of outlets. Really, I mean, almost any industry could really benefit from virtual reality. It's an exciting time to start learning about it, and whether you're going to be a user of it or actually get into the technical or software development side of it, this is I think the tipping point for this technology. So Dave is going to hop in now and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today.
Thanks, Ryan. So yeah, we're going to be looking at A-Frame. And A-Frame is a relatively new computer language. It's been around for about 5 years now. And it's a language that was really designed to help quickly and easily build virtual worlds. Just like things like Google Cardboard and some of the newer devices have kind of come around to give people easy access to VR. A-Frame came around to give people a chance to relatively easily create a VR world. So on the surface, A-Frame uses basic HTML commands that your browser can understand, but behind the scenes, these commands then get translated into an object using a JavaScript library. The great thing about A-Frame is that you can create these objects using the basic HTML commands without having to understand how the JavaScript library works behind it. Okay, so what does HTML really look like, or what does A-Frame look like? And how does this work? So we use HTML commands or tags like a sphere tag here that creates an object. When we create the 3D object, notice that we're using a beginning tag and an ending tag to do that. In the middle, we have a few different attributes that tell us what that sphere is going to look like. Okay, so once we get into our world, though, we need to kind of navigate around. And so how do we do that? So a couple ways that we do this. First, we're going to be able to grab the world. So since we don't have a headset on, we can't necessarily turn our heads to look around. So we're going to use our mouse and click and hold and actually grab the screen and move it around. And that's kind of like what it would be like to turn your head. So if you took your head and turned it left to right, that's really the idea of grabbing the screen. We can also use the W, A, S, and D keys, and those are used to kind of walk forward. Walk backwards, take a step to the left, or take a step to the right. Okay, so we're going to take a quick second to kind of demo this and see what it looks like in a world. Let me pull that up here. Okay, so this is a web browser, and in a minute, we're going to give you guys a chance to get in and play around with this. But before we do that, I wanted to point out a couple things. So when you come in, you'll probably also see this panel here, which has your files. You can kind of hide that if you want or leave it out there. The center part here is where your code is that you're going to use. And then on the right, you have a window that you can run things. Now for this, we also have this CHTML in a new window. And you may want to click this because if I run it here, I get my 3D world in a relatively small screen. If I actually click on it here, I can actually bring it up in a much bigger window. Okay, so now remember, you can kind of see my hand here. It's open. If I click down, you can see my hand kind of close. And when I do that, I can actually turn my head left and right. And that's kind of looking around. Now, if I want to move forward, I can hit the W key, and it's like walking forward. The S key is like walking backwards. The D key is taking a step to the right, and the L key is taking a step to the left. So again, I can move forward, I can kind of turn, and I can look at my objects from different perspectives. Okay. So that's the basics of how we're going to connect. Let's go back to the presentation here. Okay, a couple other things before we get started. So first of all, we're operating in a 3D world. So we have to have three-dimensional coordinates. Now notice that A-Frame has X, a Y, and a Z coordinate. Our X axis runs left to right across our screen. Our Y axis runs up and down on our screen. And our z-axis is essentially going in and out of our screen. We kind of show it here. It looks like it's kind of going on a diagonal, but it's basically coming into our screen and out of our screen using the positive directions. Okay, now we can keep track of which way is positive by using our right hands. I'm not going to hold my hand up because it looks a little bit funny, but the idea here is if you hold your right hand up in front of you, your thumb is going to point to the positive X direction, which is to the right. Your index finger is going to point to the positive Y direction, which is up. And your middle finger is going to point to the positive Z direction, which is out of the screen. So anytime we want to move in and out of the screen, Z is out of the screen positive and negative going into the screen. Y is positive going up and X is positive going to the right. Okay. You're essentially looking from the perspective of the camera when you get started. By default, the camera is going to be set at 0, 0, 0, and you're looking in the negative Z direction. Now, this is important because if you're not careful, you can actually find that you are going to put an object in a spot where you can't actually see it. So you want to make sure that you are keeping that in mind as you look through your objects. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started now. Okay, so what I want you to do for these first few minutes is just really get into the program. And by doing that, you can follow this link. We're also going to post a link in the chat that you can follow. It's going to kind of skip the videos. If you start at the beginning, you're going to notice there's a couple videos. The first video is what we just talked about, really, so you can skip that. And then there's 2 examples. And so what I want you to do for the next 5 minutes or so is just play around with the examples. You try to get into the system. You run the code, try running it in a new window, try moving around using the WAS and D and grabbing and turning and going from there. When you get to the second video, stop and we'll kind of go through that content together in about 5 minutes, and then we'll get you creating your own worlds. If you have any questions along the way, just feel free to post them in the Q&A or in the chat and we'll get to them.
And one thing to point out, we have our 2 options here. If you have a CodeHS account, go ahead and log in because that will save any work that you end up doing today. You don't need a CodeHS account. So if you don't have one, that's okay. You can just follow this link and that will take you to the right activity.
Great, thanks. All right, so it's about 15 minutes past the hour. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes, 20 minutes past the hour. Yeah, so right now, just playing around with the 2 examples, we'll kind of get further, but I want to make sure everyone can kind of get in, make sure you know how to navigate around, make sure you can move around in the virtual world. And that's about it, just playing around. If you want to try to change some of the attributes to make the objects bigger or smaller or change the colors, feel free to try some of that. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about how we can modify our objects in a few minutes. Okay, about one more minute and we'll get going back to looking at how we make our own worlds. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to get in there and play around a little bit with it. If not, we can help you out as we get started. But we're going to take a look now at what we need to do to actually create some of our own worlds.
Awesome. So to start, we're going to be able to make a sphere. We're going to create our first object. And as Dave mentioned, there are really two parts to this creation process. In black here on the left is what we call the opening tag. And so it's a-sphere. And that's telling the computer that we want to create a sphere. And then you can see on the far right in black, that is our closing tag, which is a / and then the same a/sphere. And you can see the little carets kind of closing that opening tag and the closing tag. So that's important. That defines the line at which we create our object in the virtual world. So everything else that's in red, that's what we call our attributes. So what is an attribute?
So an attribute is something that's used to modify how elements appear in our A-frame world.
Awesome. So attributes are really important, and that's what you guys are going to be working with to customize your own virtual worlds. So every object is going to have a handful of attributes, and we're going to go through a few of them, but there's even more that you can work with. So in this case, we're creating our sphere, and it has a position of 0, 1, -5. And that refers to our X, Y, and Z coordinates that Dave talked to before in that plane. So 0 in the X mean it's centered around the X, 1 in the Y mean it's elevated 1 unit above, and in this case, -3, it's 3 away from you. So that negative Z axis is away from the camera. So that's important to remember. Again, if you can't see the object, there's a good chance your positioning is just outside of that camera view. The other thing worth mentioning is that this position is in quotes, and there's a single space in between each coordinate. So 0 space, 1 space, -3, all of that in quotes. The other attribute that we changed or that you can change right now is the radius. And so the radius is going to change the size of the object. So in this case, the radius of our sphere is 0.5 meters, which is the unit. Again, that value is going to be in quotes. That's how the computer is going to be able to read it. And so you can modify and see how that changes the size. One thing to point out is that changing your position can also change how big the sphere is going to look to you. So for example, if you change that Z-axis amount, and let's say you put -15, that sphere is going to look very small to you, even if you maybe have a bigger radius. So what I recommend is definitely play around with your positioning and your radius to get the interaction that you want in terms of the size and how you want to walk around it, how far away is the object. And the final attribute we'll look at today is the coloring. The last one we had red, this one we have blue. And again, it's labeled in quotes. That's how the computer will depict it. So you can put the major colors in there and you can try out, see what works. But you can also use what's called a hexadecimal color code. And that's this kind of crazy code. And that just refers to a single specific color. So you can get a lot of variety, in the hues and tones of your color. And Dave will show you how to do that in our editor. So I'm going to pass it back off to him, and he's going to kind of show how to implement this, and then we'll let you guys go.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, so I'm going to take a look at an example, and let's take a look at how we can modify a few things real quick. So again, here's our basic editor creating a sphere. So we have a red sphere right now. Notice position is 2 in the X, 5 in the Y, -10 in the Z. And so like Ryan was saying, if I actually move this out to -20, my object's going to appear smaller because it's further away. If I make this radius bigger, then my object's going to be appearing much bigger. And again, I can then move this back further out, and it's going to get back to being small again because it's farther away. And again, if I move, I can use the W key in here, and I actually can move closer. It's going to grow slowly as I get closer. Okay. But the other thing I wanted to show you is if you're not careful, it's very easy to put the object outside of our viewpoint. So I'm going to switch back here. I put this at 10. You notice I don't see it at the start, but if I look up a little bit, there's the object. And so again, sometimes when you make stuff, you may not see it right away, but it's not that it's not there. It's just that it's out of your viewpoint. Okay, so that's position and radius. The other thing we said we could do is change color. And so yeah, we can give it names like red, blue, green, things like that. But if we want to give it a fancier name and we want to get a more specific shade of purple, for example, we can actually go into our Docs tab. So our Docs tab is located right here. If I click on it, I'm going to see a couple different options here. So one of them is color picker. If I go down and click on color picker, I can go and I can pick a different color. So if I want like a nice deep purple, then I can get that there. Now it gives me RGB here. If I just click that a couple times, I'll get the hex. And once I go there, I can then copy and paste this number in. So I'm going to copy that and paste that right here. And now when I run, I'm going to see my sphere is a nice deep purple. Okay. Now the Docs tab is also good for other things. So we showed you how to make a sphere. There's a whole bunch of other things that we can do. And as you create your world, you can come here to get an idea of that. So for example, if I wanted to add a sky, well, I can come over here and just copy and paste this code. And just like I could change the color, this is a gray sky. I could change it to a blue sky using the color picker. If I want to create boxes or things like that, I can do that. I can just click here. And this is an example of a box. So I can come over and paste my box. And let me just adjust this a little bit so it's easier to see. So now a box has more than just a radius. It has a depth, a height, and a width. And so again, I can change any of these if I want to and play around with different sizes. Okay, and now notice it's going to be straight on in the center of my view when I run it. So it's not even going to look too much like a box. It looks like a pole there. But if I actually just kind of step to the side, you'll see that box starts to take shape. And I can see different things there. So again, as you're creating your world, we're showing you a few things, but you can find a lot more examples of different objects. We have planes, boxes, cones, the sky color, things like that. So you can use these to kind of create your own world. Okay, are there any questions before we get started? If you have a question, just post it in there. So we do have a question, can we add any self-made shapes? And yeah, you can add self-made shapes with the JavaScript. You can kind of make your own shapes. You're kind of limited right now with what kinds of shapes you have. I'll talk a little bit more about some advanced options as we get further. You can also add 3D models in, things like that, but that's going to be beyond this first hour of code. So we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. Okay, so now it's your turn. Again, I want to just kind of leave the screen up here for the beginning part here as you get going. So anytime you need help, you can go to this Docs tab. Great resource with the color picker. You can also see different examples. We're not going to get into animation in this hour of code, but if you want to try something, you're welcome to try that as well. So what you can do now is go ahead, you can skip the next video and then continue with some of the exercises there. There's a couple exercises where you're just kind of creating and modifying that sphere, then creating a new plane. then you get a chance to kind of create your own world. Anytime you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will help get to them. So good question came up. Just wanted to point one thing out here. The question about using an image hosted for a texture, or you could use it for a sky as well. If you want to add an image, you have to do it. A-Frame is very particular about where it's hosted, so it needs to be hosted on our site. And so what you can do is, if you come over to yours under the More tab, you should see a upload. Yours is going to look a little bit different, but you should see an upload in there. When you click this here, you can actually upload an image. And when you do that, it'll give you a link or a URL that you can then use for that texture or for an image for the sky or something like that as well. One thing that is kind of cool, if you can find sometimes like an image of the Earth and use that as a texture on the sphere instead of a color, you can use it as a texture and it gives it the sense of a globe. You can even kind of figure out how to get it to animate and spin around, which is kind of cool. And just looking, it's possible if you're not logged in, you may not see a More tab. But I think if you are logged in, you should see the More tab. Okay, take about 5 more minutes to finish up your creation. As you do that, if you want to share it out, feel free to share it on some social network sites. You can also copy and paste your link. Once you actually click on the view in a separate window, you can copy and paste that link. And I believe you can share that link out as well. But make sure you are saved or have it saved if you're logged in. If you're not logged in, it may not save. But you can always copy and paste your code and drop it into a Google Doc and create it and actually save it as an HTML file and run it off your browser at home. So keep that in mind as well. So again, take about 5 more minutes, and then we will come back with a few ideas on where you can continue learning A-frame if you're interested in doing some more. So keep in mind too that you can actually take this into VR on your phone. If you have a Google Cardboard or a similar kind of device that allows you to view virtual reality on your phone, you can actually take your website, put it into a browser, and see your objects. Now, one thing Ryan mentioned earlier is that all of our dimensions that you see are in meters. And it doesn't really matter too much when you're looking on a screen, but if you actually get this into VR, it does matter quite a bit. You know, when I had classes that we use this in, kids would build things and you'd have this sphere that was, you know, a radius of 3, and you get in there and now your radius of 3 is suddenly 6 meters across is a diameter. And so you're talking about 20 feet wide, and you put your goggles on, or you put this in VR, and now all of a sudden you have a ball that is 20 feet in front of you and it feels 20 feet in front of you. So again, keep that in mind as you're building things. The dimensions on the screen may not actually be the dimensions you think they are when you put them into a headset and view them. But it is pretty easy to do and view this on your phone. And again, the thing that makes this work is the script tag that you see at the very start of the program. So you can really use any HTML editor. You can even use a text file and then run it on your browser, any browser at home. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the CodeHS environment to run this. You just need that script tag from A-Frame to execute your code. So again, take one more minute and then we'll kind of go from there. All right, so what is next? So hopefully you enjoyed doing what we were doing today, and hopefully you learned a little bit about A-Frame. It's a relatively simple language to get started with, but you can actually do some very complicated things. So one thing that I wanted to kind of show you is you can go back and look at the A-Frame website, so aframe.io, and you'll see a whole bunch of examples. So we looked at the Hello Web VR example here, but you'll see a bunch of different examples. I'm not going to pull them up now because that will slow my computer down as I try to do it. But again, lots of great examples. If you want to take this a little bit further, CodeHS has a virtual reality course. It's a mini course. It's about 10 weeks long, or maybe not even 2 to 3 months in length. So you can take a look at that. You can also learn A-Frame on your own. If you come over to the aframe.io, you'll see the docs. And just like we talked about cones and boxes and things like that, you can see there's different things here. You can learn how to control the camera. You can add different images in. You can learn how to do different things going from there. And then if you really want to take it further, you can start to also look at how do you introduce some of the JavaScript into it. And so you can actually create some of the objects in JavaScript and then kind of animate them and do some different things with them. And it's not as complicated as you might think. It is nice that we don't have to do any of the JavaScript for the basics, but you can actually get into some of the JavaScript relatively easily and start to do different things. One other thing I'd mention too is you can get 3D objects that you can then put in. So for example, you can go onto a site like Tinkercad and find a 3D object and actually put that into your virtual reality world. So you can find planes and things like that that are pretty interesting, not just being limited to the shapes that you have. So that's all we have for you. If there's any questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes, but thank you very much for joining us for this virtual hour of code. And I hope everyone has a great holiday season and continues doing some more coding.